When we are regulated, we invite other nervous systems around us to join in with our regulation. If we don't have good energetic boundaries, we can dysregulate when somebody else around us is dysregulated. And honestly, that was a big part of my traumatic experience that happened.
All right, folks, we've got a good one today. I am here with Jill Howell. She is an emotional health coach that specializes in somatic trauma recovery. So no worries if you don't know what those big words mean. We're going to dive in today to embodiment and somatics, cognitive processing, nervous system stuff, and specific tools and resources. So Jill, I'm so excited to dive in with you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. So let's just kind of start at the very beginning. They say it's a good place to start. Tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of your journey to getting into this field and this work.
Sure. So, I am what I call an emotional health coach now. I do focus on somatic trauma recovery, and I have gotten to this place through my own experience of dealing with trauma and trying to heal from trauma. I feel like I actually came into the world with a dysregulated nervous system. My mom was in crisis a little bit when I was in her womb and in my first year of life. And I feel like now that I've learned what I've learned, I understand that I really genuinely had a nervous system that was dysregulated and didn't feel safe in the world. And so my journey really started way back then. But little did I know until I became an adult that when I had some stacking of traumatic experiences happen, that my nervous system finally kind of came to this moment of collapse. And it came to this moment, I would say twice. The first time was not as intense. The second time was more intense. And in both of those moments, I genuinely felt like I wanted to die. I felt like I didn't have anything left in me. I didn't know how. I didn't have skills. I didn't have the skills to really move through. And this is even though I had been going through cognitive talk therapy for my 20s through my 40s. Like I went through 2 decades worth of talk therapy, traditional counseling, and it wasn't enough for my sensitive nervous system. I needed so much more. I needed the body work because my body still felt the alarm. I could try to think my way there. I could try to process and try to, help my brain to reframe things and to shift, but it's still, until just a few years ago when I discovered somatics and inner child healing and parts work and all of these other modalities of healing, that really started to make me realize, wow, I have a nervous system that needed so much more than that. My body still felt alarm and it was holding so much.
Yeah, I found it so fascinating because I feel like, from the lens that I'm looking through, there's so many of us, and I don't know if you have an opinion on why this is, but that we've just been functioning in our heads, including in therapy in so many ways. We've been functioning so logically. And of course, I'm looking at it through sort of that's sort of the masculine way. And a big part of my transformation and change came when I started leaning into paying attention to my body.
Yes.
And so for the people that are listening today that are like, what are somatics and what is this modality and what are you talking about nervous system? Because most people say I felt depressed or I thought I had these kinds of thoughts. Can you describe a little bit more, just kind of the basics about what embodiment and somatics is, like what the practice is?
Yeah, sure. So somatics comes from the Greek word soma. So soma is a part of the word somatics, and it just means body. So we are leaning into the wisdom of the body and really creating just that safety and that connection with the body through small, gentle, either movement practices or meditative practices, really allowing the body to come back to a state of ease. And the reason that I love this is because I've learned about the vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in our whole body. And it goes from our brainstem all the way down both sides of our neck in through our digestive system. It goes all the way down, and it's this long wandering nerve that really is communicating 80% of information goes from the body to the brain.
Mm.
Only 20% goes in the opposite direction. And since this research is out and has become available, scientifically, it makes sense as to why just talking about stuff isn't working enough. It's,
Oh, can I pause you there? Like, so
yeah,
80, I haven't heard that before. So
yeah.
80% of what happens in our body goes to our brain, and the other way around, only 20% of what our brain goes into our body. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So
That is
obviously
crazy.
we have this interconnection highway that is taking
Yeah.
place through this vagus nerve. This vagus nerve is our threat detector. It is communicating to the brain and the body constantly any threat signals, any cues of danger. It is on fire detecting that constantly, right? Like that's
Mm.
just what its job is. And it also has the job of it has the ability that when we stimulate the vagus nerve, we actually can create that turning on of the parasympathetic nervous system state, which is that state of ease, that state of calm and
Mm.
regulation. And
Mm.
so the vagus nerve has begun to be making a way into the world of knowledge and information, which is informing us that so much of our alarm inside of our body, when I say alarm, I really mean like anxiety, this activation, this energetic activation is like 80% of it is being held in the body.
Mm.
And it's just sending this information to the brain constantly. I'm not safe. I feel scared here. This feels like too much. Whatever the signal is, it's communicating. The brain's trying to make sense of it.
Gosh, it's so fascinating. So,
Yeah.
maybe you can talk, I don't know if you want to get a little bit into your experience or just in general, how would somebody know if they weren't comfortable in their body? Or like, I'm thinking about some women that I've talked to who have specifically said, Jen, I just don't feel like they've said that. Like, I don't think they're talking about their weight necessarily, right? They're just talking about like, I don't feel embodied, or I feel sort of disembodied, or I feel
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from my
Mm-hmm.
body. Like my head is a floating head or something. Do you have kind of like cues or things that people could look for that would maybe cue them into, you might not be as connected to your body as you think, and why would they want to be? Or
Yeah.
why would they not want to be? Why maybe are some people not connected to their bodies?
I think some people just are lacking that awareness of
Mm-hmm.
of the things that you're just saying. Like, how do we even know? We don't even, like, most people may not even know. And so I think the other thing that holds us back from this is the fact that our survival brain is bent towards familiarity. Our survival brain is has these neural pathways that are very, very much so bent towards anything familiar. So even if it's something that doesn't serve us well, even if it's something that harms us, if it feels comfortable to the brain and the nervous system, then there's some sort of safety there because it's familiar.
Mm.
And so I think that, I also think a lot of our culture has really gotten to a place of just accepting fine as okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's
Mm.
fine. And, it's fine. I have a t-shirt that says that, like, it's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. And it's literally,
That is classic for everything is not fine. It's actually on fire.
yes, yes. And that's the thing. The recognizing the body is truly on fire inside. And we're kind of denying it. And part of that, I think, also is because we've been wired that way because we've been taught that. A lot of the generations of the past did not have the emotional intelligence. They didn't have the skills and the resources to know how to move through their own emotions. So
Mm.
then when we were parented, we weren't taught how to. This is a skill. What I try to teach women is that they don't have to feel shame for feeling anything that they're feeling or experiencing anything they're experiencing. If you haven't learned the skill, if you don't know and you don't have the tools and the resources to move through experiences with ease, you just haven't learned how to do it. And it's not
Mm.
your fault. But you do
Yeah,
have a
that's
responsibility to learn if you want to move out of it, if you want to live an expansive life, if you want to not just live from that, like you said, that masculine energy of just being in our cognitive brain, trying to fix things, trying to put out the fires with our
mm.
brain, and instead come into this felt sense of safety and this knowing of, I am okay. I'm not just fine. I'm really okay inside with myself because I know how to show up for myself through every emotional experience that I face.
So powerful.
And that's where I became confident. That's how I became somebody who had that self trust. And now, as I gain that, that's where the real embodiment happens. This expansion happens because I can regulate myself to come to a space of safety. And then I can allow for expansion to happen.
Hmm. I love this so much. So one of the things that I see in the people that I'm talking to, and I think I experienced this for myself, that prior to me experiencing grief, I was so afraid of that emotion. You just touched on
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we didn't necessarily generations ago teach or were as comfortable as like moving through emotions or letting emotions move through our body.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as women, we've also had this crazy swing of the pendulum through the generations. And our last generation was like, women can do it all. We're just as tough. We can go get it. And then I think men were also taught to buckle up and not feel their emotions. And so we have, I think, in both genders, a lot of generational teaching that has taught us
Mm-hmm.
to almost like be afraid. And I think a lot of people are afraid of going into their body because they're
Mm-hmm.
not, because of honestly what they don't know. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about like that's where the safety is, that's where the expansion is, I'm like for the person that hasn't gone there and they're like, well, I'm afraid that's where the collapse is. Like I'm
Yes.
holding it together right now, but I'm afraid there's
Yes.
a collapse there. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I can. Because I think that is what holds people back a lot too, is this fear that whatever comes out is going to be too much and it's going to take me down. And I have things to do. I have to survive. I have to provide for my kids, or I have to be able to function. And there's this fear. And I think that this is where I feel like I come in at as a coach, because I hold the space safely and I teach women. I specifically work with women mostly, is I teach them the skills as to how to recover after we open up and engage in the mess. My platform on Instagram is dancing in the mess. Like my whole philosophy is like, this is a dance. We dance in the mess, but then we support ourselves really well afterwards so that the brain can feel safe to come back into this emotional experience again. That we don't have to fear feeling the emotions that actually we're creating more damage with repressing and denying them. And we're actually hurting ourselves more when we do that. And as we begin to have some tools and resources to actually create that safety to speak, to be heard, to have a voice, to allow what's really trapped inside to come out, and it's held in a safe container with somebody who's, can hold that safely for you, it's less scary. It's so much less scary. And then people are like, "Wow, I actually feel better after this."
Hmm. Hmm. You talk a little bit about how emotional energy can get stuck in the body. Can
Mhm.
you can you speak to that? Like what does that look like? How does it manifest? How would somebody know if they were not using somatics and had like energy stuck in their body? What does that mean?
Yeah, for me, in my healing journey, the very biggest factor that caused me and kind of catapulted me to discover a different type of trauma recovery was chronic pain. Chronic pain in my body. I actually had this pain that was in my neck and in my shoulders, and it was so debilitating that on some days I couldn't work. And so I went to acupuncturists, I went to massage therapists, I did cupping, I went to a physical therapist, I went to a chiropractor, and all of these things would maybe gently alleviate some of the pain in the moment, but it was still debilitating and overwhelming to my body. And I
Hmm.
was like, what the heck? As soon as I learned how to do this emotional work, my pain started dissipating. It started going
That's
away.
bananas.
And then I was like, holy cow, all of this inside of me was repressed emotions that I felt stuck in. And I knew it. I knew that what I was going through was a traumatic experience that felt heavy. It felt somewhat depressive. I felt a lot of emotions all at once. It was a lot for my nervous system. Wow.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways.
Okay. I'm going to
Good
ask
with
you,
that?
if you don't
Yeah.
mind, just like a quick question on that.
Yeah, sure.
I hear people say trauma or triggers, and I've seen different sort of definitions for that, or a spectrum of what trauma means or covers.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think that we all have had some form of trauma in our lives, especially societally with everything that's happening right now. What's your take on what trauma is? I mean, is trauma only major things, or how would you define that?
So I would say that anything that leaves this imprint on you, it can be traumatic. Okay. So I think the problem is that we use the word trauma and we're trying to figure out what was the trauma, like it was a specific thing, when in fact, oftentimes it can be a lot of small things that are repetitive. It really, for me, trauma, anything can be traumatic to the body and to the nervous system if we don't feel supported, if we don't have skills and resources to move through the emotional experience, if we feel alone in it, if we feel out of control, like something is out of our control and we don't know what to do about it. It feels like too much. It could be too much, too fast, or it can be not enough or not at all.
Hmm.
So you and I can go through the exact same experience, and we can both walk out of away from the experience. One of us can feel like that was a traumatic experience for me, and the other person doesn't at all. And it's really an inner connected knowing and a felt sense of, do I feel safe in the world or not? Like if something is causing me to not feel safe within myself or safe within the world, it can be traumatic for me. And based on my experiences of the past, that can inform my nervous system. My vagus nerve is informed of what was a threat in the past. And if I meet that threat again, then that trauma intensifies. And I feel like the brain is like trying to create this emotional chain of like, I felt this emotion here. Oh, now I feel this emotion again. And then the nervous system and this vagus nerve is like detecting, oh, there's a patterning here. Oh, I need to self-protect. Oh, this is not good. This doesn't feel good. I don't know what to do with it. And then the nervous system kind of is like collapsing inside, feeling like I have no clue what to do with this.
Yeah. I've had some unique experiences. Like I was going through my divorce, and around that time I was at a conference, and just out of nowhere, I felt my nervous system light up. We were out with some friends at a work thing, and we're having a few drinks and just walking the streets of New Orleans. And all of a sudden I felt like I was going to faint. And I was like, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I did faint. My nervous system lit up, and eventually I fainted. And then for the next 2 months, I didn't recognize it as a nervous system thing that was happening. But before I would lead trainings, a lot of people don't know this, but before I would lead trainings in front of a room, I would feel my heart start to flutter. I would start to get hot and like sweaty and just really nervous. I eventually figured out how to resource myself and breathe through that, and then recognized it as my nervous system just going into fight or flight because of the trauma that my body was holding on to. And as I haven't had it happen since, but I did have to work through that. And I think sometimes, I've heard of people that are just so stressed at work, they think they're having a heart attack and they realize they're having a panic attack, and don't, because we're not attuned to our bodies, and we're just like, I'm just going to tough it out. I'm just going to push that aside. I think we tend to stack all of that stress and trauma, right? That
Hmm.
are to our bodies, it's traumatic because
It
our
is.
bodies are like, I'm not made to handle this.
Yeah.
And we keep pressing through until the alarm gets bigger and bigger and it turns into what we think is a heart attack or a fainting spell or something, or chronic pain, like you were talking about. So I'm hoping that as people are listening today, because I think sometimes people can, for better word, people kind of write this off sometimes and think, well, I'm not there yet. But
Hmm.
I'm looking at people going, well, you could very easily be there if you have an opportunity right now to start tuning into your body and listening to the cues it's giving you and doing the work to lean into it. So I would love to hear from you, like, where does a person get started with practices on this, or what do somatic embodiment practices or that modality, what does it look like?
Sure. And I'm happy to answer that. But I also realize we really haven't answered the full question of like how do people even know, because it's not just pain, right, that manifests, or fainting. Like it can be chronic headaches, it could be autoimmune disorders, or actually a sign of stuck traumatic energy in the body that's changing you on a cellular level. It's changing the hormones of these stressful situations, and this chronic stress is actually changing our bodies on a cellular level. And recognizing that, the tightness in our chest, the shallow breaths, the stomach aches that we have, a lot of body alarms are going off to get our attention. Um, I even had a client today tell me, I just told my husband that I feel like I'm going deaf in my ears. And then when I explained to her that when you're in fight or flight, biologically, your middle ears turn off. Your middle ears are constricted and cannot work. You cannot hear and receive the tonality of all of the things that are taking place around you because the body constricts, almost like a turtle. We go into our turtle shell in self protection. The body is really, even if we don't see it in this over exaggerated stance, inwardly, all of these parts of us are going, and
Mm,
it's like, this constriction, this
mm.
tension. And then if it's not released, it's stuck and we can
And
move
there's real
beyond it.
science behind that. I mean, like you
Yeah.
were talking about the cortisol. I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, but I think that's just so fascinating. Our bodies have been built this way to protect us, and then it serves us until it doesn't serve us anymore. But can you speak a little bit to the science behind, what's happening more in that terms of constriction, or is it hormones, or what is it that is, because it's not just woo woo energy. It's not just like, oh, these feelings are trapped. It's like
No.
actual energy.
Yeah. I mean, we are energetic beings. So the energy, though, that the stress hormones are creating this energy that then gets stuck inside of our body because it becomes conditioned. And there's a pattern that creates of our body getting used to holding that tension, of that constriction. And then that becomes familiar. And so then the body and the brain view that as, oh, that's our baseline. Okay, our baseline is here. And that's where everybody's walking around like zombies, being like, I'm fine, everything's fine. And we're like, no, your body is holding so much inside, really. And so, what happens though, on a biological, scientific level, we are in that fight or flight inside of our body. Our body is working brilliantly. It's working hard to try and keep us safe, to try and help us come back to a place of being okay. And then when it's chronic and we're stuck in that pattern for too long, then we move into this dorsal vagal shutdown where our body just collapses. It's immobilization, it's disconnection, it's disassociation, it's numbing out. It's not being able to process and cognitively think clearly. And it's really this survival system that kicks on, and that comes from the body being in fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight, and then it's like freeze and shut down are activated because the body can only do so much, it can only hold so much, it
Mm,
before it gets so exhausted, if we think of it that
mm-hmm,
way. It's
mm-hmm.
working hard and then it's just tired.
Yeah. So you're working with people that are coming to you in that state, yeah? Like they're
Yeah.
just like, I'm breaking down.
Yeah.
Where do you start with them? What's the work look like?
So for me, it comes into somatic reconnection with our body, of really coming into slow, gentle understanding of sensations in the body, emotions we're experiencing, cognitively identifying what are these triggers? What is my body doing? How do I know that my body is in that fight or flight place? So I teach the nervous system education piece first because I believe that we have to understand biologically what the body is doing. I think it helps inform us. It helps us like really step aside, because what we have to do is we have to become observers. Most of the time, if we're living in anxiety and depression, often, if we're even just going back and forth between fight, flight, and freeze a lot, we feel a lot of shame and guilt for being there. And then that keeps us further stuck. And I believe that the education piece is really critical, because it lets that shame piece come down a level of like, you don't have to feel ashamed for being where you're at. Your nervous system has been brilliantly and beautifully working for you. And being in the, that fight or flight zone and being in the shutdown zone is not bad. It's human. We are all every day going through this up and down pendulum of activation and deactivation energetically all day long. We have a triggered, we bring ourselves back down to calm and ease. Something happens. And then sometimes, though, when it's too much for the body, too much for the brain, too much for the whole nervous system at large, that's when we get stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
when it's too hard to move through it. And so they need the resources. So we start with the education piece, then we move towards nervous system regulation and soothing, nourishing our heart, our mind, our body, our spirit, knowing what has worked for me in the past. And then I create more like a toolbox for them. Every week we are going in and really learning more strategies to go into the body, because it's not intuitive. We have to really learn and practice in a safe space how to do it. And then also
What
go ahead.
I was just going to ask, like, if you don't mind, what are maybe one of your top one or two tools or strategies to go into the body?
Mm-hmm. So somatics, is such a large term because it means anything body related. Breath work can be somatic. Yoga can be somatic, right? I mean, anything that we do that incorporates the body can be considered and classified as somatic. One of the things that I do is I'm constantly integrating practices. And so when I teach and guide my clients to go into their body, one of the very first things is all about touch. Okay. When we disconnect, when our brain and our body disconnect, um, moving towards ourself in just the simple way of putting our hand on our heart is so just like, okay. It communicates without words to the body. I'm here and I'm present. I'm noticing, I'm listening. And so I teach people to genuinely slow down, close their eyes, really come into the body and notice the sensations. Where are the sensations in the body? Where do you feel it? What do you feel like? What does it look like? Does it have, warmth? Does it have cold? Like, we go into it in a more expansive way than what we could on our own, because it's a skill. It's a very unique experience. But then what I do is I power punch it with inner child healing and parts work, which is we feel where this constriction and tension is being held in the body. And then we notice and observe the emotional energy that's stuck in there. And all we do is ask. Excuse me. We just ask that part of our body, like, okay, I'm feeling all of these sensations in my chest right here. And I just say, ask your chest, what is it holding? And the body knows. I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, but it's true. The body has a knowing and a wisdom that if we just pause and we actually connect with the body, we can know. I mean, we can ask the question, like, how long has this energy been stuck in here? How long have I been holding these emotions in this place? How old is this? Sometimes my clients come up with, it's, wow, 6, It's been here since I was 6 years old. It's been here since I was 8 years old.
Is
This,
that just like a subconscious, like in that moment when you're asking yourself those questions? I think because, again, if we're like super stuck in our heads, at least this has been my experience. I'm like, who is that just a random thought I'm having, or is that the body that's keeping the score that knows when I ask myself those questions? And I think part of the practice for me has been really, I don't know, just like trusting my intuition and
yes.
understanding what's intuition and what's a busy mind, and like how to know the difference between that. So when I'm asking my body questions, I know when the answers are coming from busy mind, and I know when they're coming from like my gut, you know?
Yeah.
Do
And it's a
you
learned
get that
skill.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
learned skill. And so mostly of the time it's when people are beginning this work and they're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer. And I'm like, I don't want you to cognitively think about this. I want you to close, like, this whole experience, our eyes closed down because it allows the subconscious mind to speak. We're not cognitively trying to figure it out with our eyes open. We're going into, we've already spent time by this point really connecting with the body and creating safety in the body and listening to what its needs are and what's happening inside. And just that reconnection piece opens us up to, like, they're like, well, that was weird. I guess it's like, it says 6. Like, you think, like, how is that so? And then I'm like, well, what happened when you were 6? Like, what did you feel? What did this little girl inside of you feel at 6 years old? Did she feel abandoned and rejected? Because that's, I mean, it makes sense that you would have this trigger when you feel that now, that really this little girl inside of you still feels that way. So
Mm.
what I'm doing though is I'm taking somatics and I'm power punching it with parts work and integrative modalities of healing, inner child healing, and moving this stuck energy out of the body and connecting with that core part of us that needs us. It needs a safe place to be seen and heard and validated. And it needs to be responded to with compassion and love and tenderness.
That's so great that you just said that. It's not surprising to me, but over the last like few, or maybe even just week or two, I've been running into more, whether it's on Instagram or books or podcasts or things I'm listening to that are talking about this concept of self-compassion, which I don't know if this is what you mean when you're saying parts work, but this idea that we have these parts of us that are either, wounded children still, and when we react and we're speaking out of this place, often it's that part of us that's wounded, or we have parts of us that feel shame or guilt or regret or whatever those things are. And for, I would say, almost my entire life until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, especially being like a make it happen type person, with those parts of me, I would just constantly try to fix them. And I always saw them as other, like this is this other part of me, and I don't really want it to be a part of me. So I
Mm-hmm.
was piling up shame on shame, right? Like shame
Uh-huh.
on that part of me. And it was such a light bulb to go, oh, I remember just wrestling with like, well, how do I let go of fear? How do I let go of guilt? How do I let go of shame? And having this light bulb moment of, what if I don't let it go? What if I love it? What if I have compassion for that part
Mm-hmm.
of me? And I don't know if this is like a universal law, but my experience has been that when I go to that part of me and just like express gratitude and love, and just in my mind's eye, like you said, if I close my eyes and go there, the part of me that felt all of those low vibe feelings kind of just like turns to mush.
Yes,
Like
it
just,
melts. It just
it melts.
melts. And you
It's just,
think of it as a
yeah.
little kid when they're really distressed and you hold them in your lap and all of a sudden they're just like,
You feel their body
you
relax.
feel it. And that's
Yeah.
embodiment. Like their bodies. We are now reparenting ourselves, reparenting all of these parts of us, maybe these core needs that didn't get met. And these parts of us that are still kind of on fire inside, like they feel deeply and big because they've had
Mhm.
decades worth of feeling big and not
Mhm.
being seen and heard. When we are holding them, it's like embracing. And I do guide my clients through visualization experiences We're meditatively re-engaging and connecting and holding these parts of us safely with love and so much compassion. No part is bad. There's another book. It's called No Bad Parts. And it's really all about this IFS therapy, which is internal family systems. And it is all about embracing every part of us as like an opportunity to love and connect those parts, because it's basically stemming from a core need that didn't get met at some point.
So, like, what's on the other side of this? So, let's say I spend however many months, years, a lifetime working to integrate the parts and regulate the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what happens then? Is there like, what's the result of doing this work?
Yeah. So I would say, okay, let's go basic here. And we have this window of capacity, right? We have this window of our ability to function, our ability to handle distress, okay? It's our window of tolerance, our ability to tolerate anything difficult that happens. And when we start at this point, most of my clients that start with me usually have a very small window, okay? And I tell them that every time we regulate our nervous system, every time we show up for ourselves, every time we nourish these hurting parts and we're really present with them, we're expanding that capacity. We're opening that window of tolerance and allowing our threshold to be greater. So then the next stressful experience that happens doesn't hurt as much. The triggers aren't as strong and as powerful. They don't take us down. They don't put us into a tailspin of fight or flight. We can see them. We become the observers of what is really taking place. And we are able to have the tools and the skills and resources to show up for ourselves over and over and over again. It doesn't mean we get to a state of living in that like parasympathetic state of like that ventral vagal energy of calm and ease 100% of the time. It's not human. It's not realistic. We can't live from that, but that can be our baseline. It can be our ground zero. This can be where we come back home to. We can teach our body and guide our body to come back home to that space again and again and again, because we live as a human in a hurting world full of painful things that are way out of our control always.
Well, I think like big painful things. And I also think like one of the things as a mom of 3 that I had worked hard on is just like, it can be stressful when I'm coming home from work and figuring out what to cook and my kids need to be driven all over the place and blah, things can escalate really quick where you're all of a sudden boiling beneath the surface over something that is really mundane. And I like what you're saying about just like increasing your capacity to handle stress from the day-to-day things that I think can bring us a lot of stress. If we're regulated and in that moment I can recognize, ooh, my chest is starting to get tight. Breathe. Like right there, if I just take a deep breath, like all of a sudden I feel my parasympathetic system starts to come online because breathing slows down the heart rate. Very, very basic things, but that has changed my life, like, and changed my daughter's experience of me and at work navigating tough things. And so I think that for me personally, I can recognize it in these big traumatic experiences, but also in the day-to-day to be able to resource yourself in some of the small moments that at the end of life are honestly some of the biggest moments, because we remember the day-to-day, I think, more than the big experiences sometimes too.
We remember that stuff in our body the most. We have a felt sense. Mom lived stressed all the time. Mom was calm. They have this felt sense because we're constantly, affected by the energy of others. And so we're either co-regulating or we're co-dysregulating with others.
Oh, let's pause there. That's a big one. Okay, so we are affected by the people around us and we affect the people around us. Yes. Can we talk about this for a minute? Just what does it mean you just said we're either co-regulating or co-dysregulating? Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah. So, our ability to self-regulate. Regulation just means we're coming back into balance, into harmony, into that peaceful state of ease, right? We're able to self-soothe and self-regulate. That's what that means. When we are regulated, we invite other nervous systems around us to join in with our regulation, okay? Now, we can also, if we don't have good energetic boundaries, we can dysregulate when somebody else around us is dysregulated. And honestly, that was a big part of my traumatic experience that happened in 2019, 2020, that really catapulted me forward into the work that I've learned in
Mm.
somatics and all of this inner child healing, because my body was becoming incredibly dysregulated by somebody else's body in my home that was incredibly dysregulated.
I
And
heard some
that's
study about
hard.
sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
I
good.
I heard a study about a couple of things. One, I think it was Bruce Lipton. He's a scientist and he talked about like if you take heart cells from two different hearts and put them in a petri dish, the heart cell that has the most like regulated consistent heartbeat will kind of lead the way, and then the other heart cell will line up with that heartbeat and like become regulated with it. And then I heard another study about pets like dogs. Actually, for myself, I had a breakup a while ago. And right after that breakup, my dog kept coming and laying on my chest. And she doesn't normally do that. And I was like, what is this about? Like, what is she doing? And come to think of it, she's not doing it anymore right now. But I read that if their heartbeats are really regulated, they sense that you're dysregulated and they'll put their heart next to yours to regulate your nervous system, which I was like,
Babies do
babies,
this.
same.
Think
Yeah.
about, why do they tell you to put your baby on your chest right after you've delivered them?
Yeah.
That closeness, that safety, that regulation of your heartbeat and theirs. But it also means that as parents, this is the real thing. I mean, the real sucky part of being a parent is that we also, if we're coming into life daily dysregulated, we are projecting that onto the other humans around us. And our kids learn the patterning, their bodies, their nervous systems align with what they know and with what is familiar. If that is
Mhm.
their familiarity, then they will grow up feeling dysregulated as well.
Oh, it's so crazy. So in parenthood, I would for sure say in partnership, I
And
can imagine
mhm.
that even in a work environment, if I'm walking into a room and I'm very dysregulated, I know I can feel it when other people walk in a room. They don't have to say a word. I can feel anxiousness, right? You can feel
Mhm.
the energy that feels dysregulated. And I, Hmm. What would you say to somebody like in the moment? If I, as a mother, or let's say in a romantic partnership, I'm recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm dysregulated and I'm about to enter a tough conversation, or I'm about to come home from work. What would be like the top quick thing I could do to regulate myself out of a sense of like, I want to be the responsible one here to do what I can to show up as healthy as I can? Are there things you can do in the moment, or do you need to really spend the time diving in deeper to do this work?
Oh, I think you can do lots of things. There's lots of small things, and everybody's nervous system receives things differently. So I can't say it's a one size fits all approach, right? Like what I'm doing when I'm working with my clients is we are looking at tools, we're exploring things, but I want them to see, what does this feel like for your body? This might feel really good and nourishing for my body, but maybe not yours. This might help soothe yours, but not mine.
Mm.
And I've come to find that to be true with all of my clients. There are some tools that they're like, no, that actually does not feel good at all. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, don't force,
Mm.
don't push, flow. And so it
Sure.
becomes like a really like gentle respect and honoring of what feels good for the body. So whether that's breath, whether that's holding, I hold myself a lot, honestly, and I
Mm.
rock. I
Mm.
don't remember ever being rocked as a child.
Hmm.
And, I'm not mad at my parents for that, but it's just this like, I don't remember. Maybe it happened, but I don't have any knowledge of that. And for whatever reason, it feels good and soothing. Um, there's another activity where, like, just palming is one of the ones that works, is really strong for my clients. You just put your elbows up on like your legs or on a table or whatever, and you rub your hands together and warm them up. And then you literally put your palms on your eyes and you just sit there and you breathe and you hold this safe space. And what I would say is I always am intertwining things. So then in that moment, I'm saying, like, I'm talking to myself. I am the guide. So I'm like really preparing myself for whatever the conversation is. I will use some of these somatic practices to help the body come down, but then I will also, you know, speak to my body. It's one of the reasons actually why I love EFT tapping. This is my favorite, my most favorite tool in my toolbox. It's helped me the most because it involves cognitive processing and somatic body calming at the same time. It's both. We're tapping on the body, but we're outwardly processing through what we're about to do or what's happening or what's triggering or what's stressful. And we're guiding ourselves back to a state of ease and of confidence and of claiming what it is that we want to claim and what we want to be, how we want to show up for something.
Great. These are great tools. I know we're getting to the end of time here. So,
Yeah.
Jill, before we hop off, I want to make sure we mention, where can people find you? Do you have any resources that they can get a hold of to get started with this work?
Yeah. So you can find me online at jillmariehowell.com. So JillMariehowell.com. You can find me on Instagram, Jill Marie Howell. I'm also, my URL actually is Dancing in the Mess, because I like the analogy of all of we're dancing in the mess of, pain, but we're also dancing in the pleasure. And so it's kind of a dance between holding space for both, is how I like to view it. But also I do have a free guide that would love to share, with your audience. That it's a free guide that actually has 5 videos and audios that guide the body back to a state of ease when we're feeling anxious or overwhelmed. So it's really helping to relieve the anxiety and the overwhelm that we're feeling. And we all feel it on a daily basis. Like, we all have moments of things that trigger us to feel that. So helping you to learn how to move through that skillfully.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill, for your work and for bringing the awareness to the forefront. I think this is such a powerful conversation for so many of us that have just been in our heads and can benefit from getting in our bodies. So thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you so much for having me. I've loved it.